Hello and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imonia Marere. One of the fallouts of the recent strike called by organized labor in Nigeria over the minimum wage issue is the controversy that greeted the shutting down of the national grid by workers in the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, while the strike lasted. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Senator George Akume, was so peeved by the action of the workers that he described it as treasonable felony bordering on economic sabotage. In response, the Nigerian Labour Congress, through its head of public affairs, Benson Upa, said it did not commit treason, but instead pointed accusing fingers at those it said are looting the treasury, padding budgets, those who are engaged in foreign exchange round-tripping, inflating contracts, and stealing of oil subsidy funds as the ones guilty of treasonable felony. The NSC describes the strike as not only legal, but a civic duty. This incident has, however, brought into focus the provisions of the Trade Disputes Essential Services Act of 1976, which prohibits and forbids essential services from joining in any strike capable of disrupting the economy. It would seem that the Act abrogates the right of workers in essential services, like the power and health sectors, from going on or joining any strike, or even if they do, it restrains them from crippling services in those sectors. The Act clearly provides for consequences in case of a breach. The big question is whether or not this law breaches the fundamental rights of the individual worker. And should workers in the essential services sector be allowed to hold the nation to ransom by threatening its security and disrupting the economy in the name of exercising their fundamental human rights? Now, how relevant is the Trade Disputes Act, which was enacted in 1976, to today's circumstances? Why is it still in the law books in the form it is now, if it is no longer serves its purpose, saying that it has repeatedly been observed in breach each time there is an industrial dispute? Now, this is the focus of our discourse on the program today. How can critical national infrastructure be shielded or protected from the vagaries of strikes and industrial uncertainties? I am being joined in the studio by Professor John Gambo La. He is Chairman, Industry Relations, Kaduna State University. He was also the pioneer Vice Chancellor, Greenfield University, Kaduna, a member of the Academic Advisory Committee of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Kuru, in Jos, and former Dean of School of Postgraduate Studies, Kaduna State University. Thank you, Prof, for finding time to join us.
My pleasure.
We're also joined by our good old friend on this program, a legal practitioner who is based here in the nation's capital, Mr. Michael Mbanefo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's go on a short break, and when we come back, we'll go straight into our discussion.
Of our dream, the Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
Thank you so much for staying with us, Professor John Gambola and Barrister Mike Mbanefo are here, right here with us. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
First, let's review some of the events that took place during the last strike called by the organized labor in Nigeria, one of which resulted in the shutting down of the national grid.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to wish viewers and listeners happy Democracy Day. Well, it is important for us to see things in perspective. There was a strike declared by the Nigerian Labour Congress in conjunction with the Trade Union Congress to the fact that there is need to review the salaries of public servants, and that led to a declaration of strike by the NLC and the TUC on the 3rd of June 2024. But of course, as we know, that strike came and a lot of things happened. The national grid was shut down and so many other services were shut down. And of course, the question is, should we shut down the national grid because we're on strike? There is no need for any strike in the first place. And what happened, if you check back in 2000, when General Olusegun Obasanjo was president, salaries were reviewed automatically from the executive. There was the decision to review salaries. And then we have it in our understanding and agreement with the NLC that every 5 years there will be an effort to review salaries. But of course, this has not been the case. And I think what made the last strike an issue is because of the fact that we have, when the subsidy was removed last year, it led to a significant increase in prices of goods, and then the workforce and the workers in Nigeria saw it as, look, this is no longer probable. And so the 30,000 minimum wage was considered inadequate. And of course, Nigerians agreed to the fact that there's need to review the salaries of workers. But then the strike came in, and we are happy that it was just a very short, within 24 hours, a decision was made. But the shutting down of the national grid caused a lot of pains to many Nigerians. I'm from Kaduna. I had a patient in the hospital, and the doctor had to discharge everybody because according to their own decision, they could no longer keep patients in the hospital since there will be nobody to take care of them. So I think it has reached a level that Nigerians are questioning whether the strike action taken and the fact that we have labor unions decide to shut down essential services, there's no need for that. But I think, as we discussed, we need to also understand that the Trade Dispute and Essential Services Act, which has not been changed, and it's an old act, so to say, but there's nothing wrong, actually, with the act, so to say, in the sense that it has really laid down those things that are considered essential services and the penalty for disrupting the essential services. And this will not be the first time. I know the comment made by the SGF, as you have rightly mentioned, caused a lot of disaffection. But we need now begin to position things to look at the moral implication of certain statements and the legality of those statements. And I think as we continue the discussion, these things will play a role clearly. But I think it is time to begin to think clearly. We need to change our design, our orientation, and our style and strategies, especially during strike. How we're going to do it, I'm sure the discussion as we go along will unfold a lot of things.
Mr. Mbanefo, let me ask this fundamental question. Going by the Trade Disputes Act, what is considered an essential service? Who is considered an essential service worker?
Okay, with regards to that, essential services, of course, people that fall under essential services are like PHCN, as it were, the police, the Federal Road Safety, and to an extent the courts, you know, and with particular reference to power sector, there was a decision. A thing like this has happened sometime in the past, early 2000, where it was a case between the NUEE and Bureau for Public Enterprise, where they privatized PHCN, and the labor union of the PHCN says no, you can't do that, and therefore they threatened strike, they embarked on strike, to the effect that they went to court. The lower court, they argued on objections were raised with regards to jurisdiction. It was allowed. In the appeal, it was reversed. In the Supreme Court says that the NUEE falls under the essential services. And therefore, whatever they want to embark on does not fall within the purview of trade dispute. And again, that it affects the entirety of the Nigerians, not to talk of the hardship it will bring on the citizens. And therefore, they gave perpetual injunction restraining the NUEE from further threatening and embarking on strike. The effect of this is that, till date, as far as that Supreme Court decision stands and has not been distinguished, anybody that falls under the essential services must not, should never, can never embark on any such industrial action until that Supreme Court decision is set aside, if it will be set aside. And again, even though they are part of the trade union, there is a procedure which they must follow. It's clear, Section 4, Section 5 of the Trade Act made those provisions sacrosanct. But the question is, if the procedure requires notices to be given to the federal government, 15 days, as it were, because some people want to embark on ventilating their fundamental rights as provided in Section 40 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, which allows you to freedom of association, freedom of this, freedom of that, and again, trade union. But the question is, going to turn off the national grid, what about people who are not members of trade union? If your right begins to infringe on another person's right, Section 45 of the Constitution comes into play. It will abrogate your own right, because where your right stops, another person's own starts. So, and again, even if the Trade Dispute Act or whatever act they make that protects the labor union is in place, it is clear, the ground norm says any act or law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria should abate to the extent of its inconsistency as provided by Section 1, subsection 3 of the Constitution.
So the fundamental question,
Yes.
Mr. Mbanefo, is, are trade unions and leaders of trade unions aware of the provisions of the laws that you have quoted, including the decision of the Supreme Court, which you have just made reference to, when they take decisions as to who should go on strike, who can go on strike with them?
This question points directly on leadership, qualification of leadership, capacity of leadership. It's not about being a very aggressive, outspoken person that leads the masses. When the president talks, you talk back at him and all those things. You must fall within the rules of engagement, which allows you to say what you have to say, backed up by laws that are incontrovertible. I cannot wake up tomorrow and become a professor. That's a due process. You must first of all pass your requisite exam as a degree holder. You must again do your master's and again proceed with your doctorate degree, write a lot of books, speak a lot of English, occupy academic office not less than 10 years before you begin to consider visiting professor and finally a professor. So if you, like I said once upon a time in this studio, if a scoundrel is a leader and every other person holding him towards the observances of his own ideology. It means that he's a leader of scoundrels. But where a man who is qualified and understands that things must be done according to the law is leading. When you tell him to punch, he will first say, let me consult the book. So, I'll give you a case in point. In Germany today, no matter how threatened you are as a person by another, you don't punch. You don't hit. You may touch the person, you will collapse there intentionally. And say because when you raise your hand, he fainted and all those things, that you become liable to what is agreeable to him in terms of wages, which you have deprived him by inflicting some kind of, what would I call it? Borrow me an English to use to qualify that.
Whatever physical force or whatever.
Some kind of apprehension.
Yes.
You know, so with regards to what you just asked me, the leaders may be aware of the law. But you see, Nigerians, with due respect and without sounding immodest, without trying to cast aspiration to anybody, we deal more of morality than law. Why would anybody? Why would? And it is this why that brings about deviance actions. But if you look at the law says, well, elections has been casted, the president has won. After all, they said election. In my language, they say ndoro ndoro, which means drag. So if the president had dragged it and gotten there, and the annex said that man dragged it, who is with the power? It is him. And they declare, you have no choice than to follow the law. The next thing is to go to court. Now, currently, the federal government, as I heard, in the person of the Attorney General, has gone to court. But there was a court once upon a time that gave this ruling in regard with, that took effect in 2010 when such a thing repeated itself. What the Attorney General ought to do is to go to court and say, okay, this law has been there. Supreme Court, you have declared this. Essential duties are nominal parties of labor union. Because the moment they join strike action, they will invoke the powers of Section 45 of the Constitution. Now, and the decision of the Supreme Court in that case was to the effect of a combined reading of Section 45, Section 315, and Section 316 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, not any other legislation but the Constitution, which is the ground norm, which from where every other law derives its power. So if any lawyer is seeing otherwise, that law is powerless. Because according to the church, they say when power jump power, the lesser power will bow.
So, Prof, as an expert in industry relations, what do you think ought to have happened in this situation? In the first place, was it necessary? Was this strike necessary? Why did the federal government wait until labor decided to call a strike before taking negotiations serious? Could it not have been avoided?
Absolutely. This strike was avoidable and it shouldn't have taken place. But let's also understand, I'm happy the lawyer has made it clear. And of course, we need to also know that this is not the first time the Trade Dispute Act has been, implemented, so to say. Because General Babangida had to sentence some people to prison. They were sentenced, to prison. They were sentenced. You remember when the national grid was off during Babangida's time? A lot of people, in fact, the argument was that they should have been, executed. And that was the argument. But of course, that was a military regime, and people think that the law should be different. No, the law is very clear. It is clear that in the Trade Dispute Act, you are not supposed to embark in economic sabotage. There is no any other language in terms of what happened, offing the national grid. But of course, you have made reference to the SGF, to the fact that he cited example. He said there is no country under the sun where workers go on strike and they put off the national grid. But you see, the truth is this. I think this is time. Now that things like this are happening, it is time for us to begin to think, how do we take another look at the concept of strike in Nigeria? Because it is now becoming, so to say, useless. I belong to the ASU as an affiliate member of the NLC. And remember that we were on strike for almost like 6 months. You can say literally nothing happened. The strike came, students suffered, but there was no benefit from that strike. I can say it without missing words. Benefit in the sense that I lost so much money in terms of salary, and it did not change anything. Everything remained as it were, because nothing has happened after that. So I think what we are saying is that the strike now, as it were, we should begin to fashion a new way. And what is the way out? Because initially you find that NLC and all other affiliates had actually frowned at the idea of lobbying, getting representation and then lobbying to ensure that their needs are catered for. The law of Nigeria is clear. The Constitution of Nigeria has given everybody the opportunity, protected you to work and seek employment anywhere, and it is very clear. But I think the issue now is that it is becoming like something that is no longer...
Child's play.
Yeah, it's child's play. It's no longer fashionable, and it's no longer delivering results. Now, the strike that was embarked upon, at the end of the day, all went back to the drawing board. They went back to the table to negotiate, and this is what should have happened. But I think the argument NLC is making is that they have tried severally to make this discussion. Even the tripartite committee has been in place since January. And it shouldn't take 6 months to arrive at something. And I think the delaying or not taking things seriously. And I like the argument. If you listen to the senators and members of the House of Reps, they are saying that, look, the national anthem bill, it took just a few days, 2-3 days, and it was over. So some of these laws about in terms of wages, we should make it standard. There shouldn't be any need to go on strike because of salaries. Now, people go on strike, and it is every worker has a right. People go on strike, but it shouldn't be on minimum wage. It shouldn't be on minimum wage. You can go on strike because of some conditions within the system that will emanate, but not in terms of remuneration as per what is your entitlement as a worker, which is your salary, what is the salary scale that you should embark on. I mean, you should earn as somebody who is working in a particular cadre. So I think now where we are now, and the reason why some of these things, like I go to NIPS, and issues of power is strategic to any country. No country jokes with the issue of power. Power supply can cause a lot. Remember when our president came in, and then we had issues with the Niger Republic because of the military coup there. The first thing was that, look, let's put off light. Let's not give them light, because you can use power as an arm, as a tool for fighting anybody. So we are seeing the Labour, the NLC, going to off the strike. But the point is that if you ask the Nigeria Labour Congress, they will basically tell you that they actually didn't off the grid. The affiliate members went on strike, and then who is there to control
They say that machines don't run themselves.
That is it. So they went on strike, and because they went on strike, they can't leave.
We saw videos of
certainly
members
picketing and actually preventing,
actually switching off the
switching
grid.
and preventing others from going to work. So that is the issue. I think we now need to sit. Maybe there should be need for a national conference on issues of strike, and then let's now understand. But if you look at the Trade Dispute Act, there's nothing extraordinary. It's a simple thing. It's taken from what you have generally, from the International Labour Organization. Whatever you have in Ghana is captured there. There is no big deal about the Trade Dispute Act. And I think the comment by the SGF is what actually generated a lot of things, say this treasonable felony and whatever. There's nothing short of that. It's just that...
Was it in his place? I mean, talking about the Secretary to the Government of Federation. Was it in his place to make such comments? I mean, flowing from what Barrister Ambanefo said earlier on, there's a chief law officer for Nigeria, which is the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, who should be seized of these legal issues. Yeah, but the comment made by the SGF, George Akume, was not even a legal issue. He was just making a comment, just like any public commentator. He was just making a comment. And of course, he's the secretary
Of the
of the
government of the
government.
federation.
There's no better person that will give a summary of what government is thinking than the SGF. So he may not have a legal whatever to, but this is a general comment. He did not
Freedom
make
of
reference
speech.
to the fact that, look, this is the constitution, this is the rule. He was just saying, and of course, the constitution, the trade dispute act is written in the English language, and anybody that can read English can interpret to some extent. So he was just making comment as the secretary to the federal government that, look, oh, this is actually something that is true. And of course, you know the reference that has been made. Even the industrial Justice Kenya rule, not quite long, preventing NSC from going on strike. When we were on strike some 2 years back, there was a judgment. And I'm not sure there has been any, nobody has overturned that judgment, and there has not been any appeal to that, so to say. So as far as the SGF is concerned, he made a comment like a general person. For me, I had a patient in the hospital, and I was not very happy. Though I'm an ASU member, but I was not very happy. You see, the issue of life is a different thing. You can make your case. You don't need to off light in any country. You don't need to stop hospital services. If you recall that anytime there's a strike, there's always need for medical care because a lot of people that move around, some will faint on the... So that is when you need services. And we are now beginning to compare ourselves with the developed society and then beginning to... No, those people, the private sector is already far developed. And how many people? All this argument we are making, there are only 1.5 million workers in the federal government. Only 1.2 million. They are not more than that. So a large chunk of the population, we are 227 million now. And so if you have only 1.2 million who are actually working for federal government.
Federal government workers.
Yes. And then you have the state and the private sector. So it's the private sector that is the engine room. This is where you have so many workers, so to say, in Nigeria, because they are in the private sector. So, but the private sector is not as developed, because in developed societies, the private sector pay more than the state, than the public, than the federal government. But now we have a situation whereby everybody is now in the federal government because that's where the payment is, and simply because we have not developed the private sector in such a way that the private sector can actually pay well and absorb the large number of people. So the truth is that strikes now is we need to think and begin to change, fashion out a new way, and there's nothing like sitting and discussing these issues and then being sincere to ourselves and things like that. Because at the end of the day, the tripartite committee came back to the drawing board. They sat down, took water, and then agreed on whatever will come out. So it's just for us to understand it and then be disciplined.
Let me bring you back to the Trade Disputes Essential Services Act. That was a piece of legislation made in 1976.
Yeah.
We are in 2024.
Yes.
And that piece of legislation has not undergone any form of review or reform. Does this still serve the needs of today? I ask that question against the backdrop of the fact that the Act prescribes certain offenses and certain punishments for those offenses. For instance, what has happened now, the shutting down of the grid, if the individuals were to be prosecuted, leaders of these unions were to be prosecuted, if they are found guilty, the sentence will only be 6 months. Or a fine of 200
According
naira.
to the Trade Dispute Act.
Yes, or 200 naira as fine.
Okay.
So does it still meet the needs of today?
The beautiful thing is that the act so made transited from the time of the military to the civilian rule and survived by the Constitution of Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999 as amended. If persons who tampered with the national grid will be charged, it behoves on the Attorney General of the Federation to choose under which law they will be charged. When a person conducts himself in such a manner that infringes on national security, Section 45 abrogates his right, and the appropriate section 46, for example, say if you feel your right will be or is being breached, go to court. Now, the federal government feels that their own right as people who are custodians of the Constitution is in breach. Based on Section 46, they will go to court. The appropriate laws under which the people will be penalized, the Constitution can find a person. There are provisions for treasonable felonies in the Constitution. So we must, you may not and must not charge the person under the act that is seemingly obsolete. Treason is treason. It has its own sentencing, which ranges from death penalty to life sentence. So it doesn't matter whether the the Trade Dispute Act was made in 1914. What matters is that there is a ground norm that everybody is answerable to, pursuant to Section 1, subsection 1, that this law is binding on all persons and authority within the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which includes the trade union. So if you feel that because the penalty in Trade Dispute Act absolves you with 200 naira fine, you are deceiving yourself by half. The Constitution will hold you accountable because that is our ground norm. If a child commits an offense against his father or against the family, his immediate family, it is father's choice to choose whether to slap him or to flog him with cane, depending on which size of cane he chooses to slap him with. You may proceed against the person based on the Constitution. You may proceed against the person based on the Trade Union Act. Just like we once argued victims of gunshot wound here in this thing. That act is obsolete. And the essence of subsidiary legislations is to cure the lacunas that the Constitution omitted. So where you place the Constitution side by side with the Trade Union Act, and the Trade Union doesn't seem to be saying the mind of the legislature, they will ignore it and do the needful. Likewise, if the legislature has made some law that has some little lacuna, and there's a subsidiary legislation that seems to cure that one will take preeminence over the provisions of the Constitution. That's the law.
Labour says that going on strike is legal and a moral civic duty of labor. What is the place of morality in law?
Okay. Law has no business with morality. Morality is synonymous with equity. But what is equitable is also juxtapose itself to law. The law gave you, under Section 4, a right that are fundamental to you. Freedom of expression, freedom to go to strike, freedom to do this, freedom to do that. But that right is not absolute to you, according to the dictates of the Supreme Court decision on the NUEE and the BPE. The right is not absolute. Okay, because you are doing strike, if you see the MD of PHCN trying to switch on this thing, you kill him and say because you are demonstrating right. Where your right starts, another person's end. Where your right stops, another person's own starts. For instance, I am not a member of the trade union. I am in the private sector. I am a legal practitioner, practicing by myself. Then you go and switch off my light because they are not paying you salary. Nobody is paying me. I'm paying myself. I am actually contributing tax to pay you. So why would you hold me to ransom for paying tax to pay you? Mind you, the federal government never said they would not pay minimum wage. They said that with the current situation of the country, we cannot go beyond X amount. Not that they don't want to pay. I think the proper thing to do, somebody comes today, I have headache. Next tomorrow, I have headache. Next tomorrow, I have headache. The proper thing to do is to tell him to go and do what? Test. Yes. With the test result, you'll be able to know exactly what is wrong with the person so that you can nip it on board. Likewise, labor, why the federal government is seemingly handicapping attending labor from inception till date is basically a corrupt mind. If, for example, legislators who make these laws do laws that makes them understand that they are representing certain persons and certain constituencies. Being mindful that what is good for the geese is good for the gander. That if the legislator can have bumper harvest, the people they represent should at least look like people whose brothers are farmers. Why the federal government is having issues persistently and consistently is because the monies that are made for public use, for taking care of the labor union and so on and so forth, is in perpetual looting. So if the federal government has a lot of money, UK, Europe, everywhere, you see them saying, oh, citizen, because there's COVID, they tell you go to your NI without permission and start crediting you money so that you should not die. We can do better. In the 1980s, when any Nigerian goes to any part of this world, we are like mayors of our own. The people gather, white people gather to come and receive Nigeria. Today, the reverse is the case. So when we are talking about, without sounding the modest to Prof said they should go back to drawing board and discuss minimum wage. The topic should not be minimum wage. The topic should be to close the tap where these things are leaking. How do you explain a legislator who comes and probably may not make any law throughout his tenure? He has a brand new car, he has this, they keep on giving them money as if we are passing through there to heaven. What we should do is to make sure, okay, sir, if you give your wife your school fee, your children's school fees to the tune of 1 million naira to cater for your 3 children that are requiring that 1 million for their school fees, and she uses it to go and buy a bada, and so weave on, leaving 200,000. She will go to the school and beg the principal to give her time to pay, right? She deposits the 200,000 naira. The time is coming, she's keep going, you don't know. Suddenly your children say, Daddy, in short, we're not going to school again. If you don't want to pay our school fees, we're not going. The law did not say, you didn't envisage that the person who you gave money to be trustees of that money didn't embezzle it. So it likens itself to the fact that unless you make your wife accountable, that matter will live as long as Nigeria keeps aging.
Barrister Ombadenfo, let me throw in something here. Do you agree that the legal profession in Nigeria,
yes,
you lawyers, have a lot to do in educating both the labor unions and ordinary Nigerians like us about some of these laws, especially laws that deal with industrial disputes? Agrees that the labor unions have legal advisors and legal representatives, but it appears that they are not doing much, or if they are, the labor leaders are not taking their advice.
I will respond by just opposing my answer to your earlier submission, which was the fact that you mentioned morality. In Nigeria, we leap before we look. I agree that practitioners will advise, but the question is, when you advise, have you taken the advice? People go to church every day they are asking God for money or one thing or the other. How much have they given God in terms of conduct? God requires only one character from all of us, morality. The only request God made is morality. But how many of us are giving him back that morality? You see some sneaky people who go there and sow seed of 10 million thinking that God is a broody change. It doesn't work that way. Morality is not law. The persons you are talking, trade union, if you go to Motor Park where they have their own trade union, don't bring lawyers to them to begin to, because lawyer has to earn his own fee professionally, because our own is a Nigerian Bar Association, which is likening itself to labor union of our own type. Mm-hmm. Will you now say because we came to advise Motor Park man we shouldn't earn wages, so we talk free and go? Even pastors in churches tell you to sow seed and give your offering. Mm-hmm. So we also want offering. In the fact that the offering you are going to give us is not sufficient enough to warrant the effort we are making. It's stalemate. So what is there is that we must join hands together to cure corruption, which is more than COVID in Nigeria.
Prof, we run a federal system of government in Nigeria. But as it is now, it appears that these wage negotiations is going on at the federal level with the trade unions, the federal government, and the private sector. Nobody appears to be talking so much about the states and the local governments. In a federation, should everyone, should there be a level minimum wage for all workers in Nigeria? Should the states, for instance, not be in place to determine or to decide what minimum wage they can pay their workers?
I think that's why we're talking of the minimum wage instead of a living wage. Because, of course, if you, I don't know whether it is coming out with the social media coming out with what states have agreed to pay their workers. Some states are actually paying well. I saw Borno State 70,000, and then Zamfara State 30,000, that kind of. But we're talking of minimum wage, and I would give you an example. I was in ABU, which is a federal university, and I moved from ABU to Kaduna. When I moved from ABU to Kaduna State University, it wasn't because of the salary, although the salary of Kaduna State University was far better than the federal university. But that was not. I came in because I saw a gap and I wanted to fill. But when I moved in, I could move from federal to state, and somebody can move from state to federal. That is the joy. So, but if you now discriminate in such a way that you want to pay, there should be, if you insist on significant gap between federal and state, then you are going to cause problem, especially in that country. Because now you cannot take a professor from a federal university and a professor of state and see the difference. He's a professor. So if you decide to allow state to pay less than what federal is, what we are even saying is that the state should pay more than the federal, so that we can reduce this pressure in the center. But if we insist and say that, look, a state can decide and can make their own minimum wage, it will cause a lot of problem, especially in this cadre we call the civil service and the public service. Remember that the agitation now is state police. Now, the whole concept of state police, why are people fighting for state police? It is because they have seen the inadequacy of the federal police, and they think that there should be state police that will understand the environment of each state, and then people will be able to intervene. So if you don't harmonize the salaries, because salaries should be seen as something of strategic importance in any country, because when you discriminate so much, it can cause disaffection and it can cause instability. And federal government will not be able to manage instability from any state. So if Kaduna State is unstable, you may have to declare a state of emergency. So it is important to have a minimum to say that, look, for federal and state, nobody should go below this. However, you can decide to give more, and we're already having that. In fact, in the university state, there are some state universities that are paying far twice the federal, and nobody has raised any alarm. Nobody has said anything. If you have the money, you pay. So I think, given that we're insisting on true federalism, but we should be talking of having the benchmark, and then people can build from that. So if we say that 100,000 should be, okay, let any state start from 100,000. If Lagos State decide to pay 120 as minimum, so be it. But we are insisting that government should look at what labor is saying and then not discriminating because of state capacity. In any case, the money that goes to state is actually coming from the federal. It's the allocation from the federal government that goes to the state. What you call the IGR, the internal generated revenue, it boils down to nothing, especially when you look at some states. Some states don't really get anything. They don't make anything. So it is important that we should insist on having a minimum. The word minimum, I think people are talking of living wage, but we should have a minimum. And that's the concept to which I'm using the minimum, that in the whole federation, we should have this.
A base.
A base. And that will also include the private sector. But there should be a way. Look, it is important. Even the private sector can actually be supported by the federal government, because it is in the interest of stability of a country that you want all these things, people to be happy. Because if they are not happy, then you now have to spend a lot of money at the federal to maintain that kind of stability. We don't want a situation whereby there will be strike in some state and then government will have to declare state of emergency. No. So how do you do that? We are all in the same country. We go to the same market, both federal and state and private. It is the same market. So if we can get that, honestly, even this stealing, will, not that it will stop, because it will stop at one, but it will reduce. The reason why a lot of people are taking money and taking resources, common resources to themselves and ensuring that nobody gets, is because they believe that the resources are scarce. And so if they make them available, it will be okay. So we are saying that government should actually implement minimum wage. But the argument is that NLC should understand that government resources are not just every day. The point he has made is that you have to block the leakages. And we agree there are leakages. And that is also the insinuation, because the argument that was made by the NLC is that if government can stop corruption and stop this stealing and this taking money outside, that it will do well. Well, fine, that is okay. That is an argument that we need to look at. And that's why I said we may need to have a conference, so to say, whether we call it national or whatever, and discuss those things. But for now, for the immediate distant term, we need to agree to have a benchmark. Because let me tell you, I was in Gusau 10 days ago, because they had their, the Federal University of Gusau had their convocation, and I represented my VC at that convocation. The governor came, and he told all those who were present that education was his mainstay. He was going to do everything in education. And I know somebody whispered and said, well, when you invest in education, you must also invest on the people, the teachers, so that they can. So the whole thing about Nigeria is the massive. Look, it's magic when you see something. Yesterday, I was in a filling station in Kaduna, and I simply just joked with the attendant to say, look, people are making money now that fuel is, and she swore that her salary was 8,000 per month. I go, my house and the university is about 5 kilometers. Every 2 days, I spend 7,000 naira fuel. But we are talking of one person getting 8,000 per month. No, there can't be justice. So it is important for us to come to a level.
So that now underlies the whole issue of whether or not the private sector will be able to cope if and when a minimum wage is put in place. But let me come to an issue that I think we need to look at moving forward, which is there's no way we can legislate strikes away. Strikes will continue to happen,
Obviously,
in different sectors of the economy. But how can critical national and strategic infrastructure be protected and, as it were, shielded from the actions of those who go on strike?
the fastest and the simplest and the cheapest way is to punish severely anybody that tampers any national facility. That is the cheapest. Going to look for legislation or no legislation is there in the Constitution. You begin to go and set up committees and all this is a waste of another money. Somebody has gone to switch off the national grid. You arrest him there and there and don't even put him in Kuje. Send him to a Loring prison there. Take him to court and convict him, and it's almost like a strict liability offense. The problem is that nobody in this country is held accountable for anything, except if the government is interested. And why would the executive be interested in what is happening in the judiciary? Their duty is to bring the person to court and let the court decide, and not begin to push the court to say what they are not supposed to say, either by threatening them and all those things. The proper thing to do and the cheapest thing to do is to open the books of the law. What does the law say when you do this? You should go to Kuje. Send the person to Kuje. By the time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when they see something that resembles national grid, even if it's a dummy, they won't near it. In case if it fails by itself, If a mechanic kills, if a madman kills somebody's father, if you see mechanic cannot run, then you must be very silly. Because both of them dress alike.
Prof, what would be your suggestion along this line?
No,
How
I
can
would just
critical
suggest,
and strategic national infrastructure
yeah, I think
be protected?
he spoke, the issue of leadership. The NLC, I think those who are seeking leadership, remember that what actually happened years back was this idea, we lost faith in NLC at some point. Because of what? Because it got to a point where government were now sponsoring people to go and take over the leadership of NLC. And so if you look at this strike, in fact, I can tell you clearly from my territory, we were even saying that NLC will call the strike before the day. It has been the tradition that you announce strike will be tomorrow by midnight. They will call off the strike. We normally argue that they have been settled, so to say.
True.
And that is why they are not calling off strike. But it started when government were now sponsoring pseudo candidates to take over NLC. We had that situation.
Including Students' Union.
Yes, and with student union too, it became an issue. So I think this time around, the issue of advocacy, I think NLC also needs to, there should be some kind of advocacy from the government to NLC to understand that, look, these issues of national interest is important. There are services. The law is clear, and nobody can say that NLC is ignorant of the Trade Dispute and Essential Services Act. No, it is in, if you go there, it is in their shelves. And virtually every leader of NLC understand that. But I think we need to now sit and say that, look, we are serious. NLC will tell you that they did not tamper with this, like you are saying, but there are evidences of people going to switch off and things like that. So the argument is that, did you find them? Can you attribute them to
Immediately
NLC?
the strike was called off.
But
NEPA came back.
But again, when NEPA went off, everybody felt it. Everybody. But we are just talking of NEPA. Our students were writing WAEC. And WAEC is a regional body.
Examination body, yes.
Yes. So if Ghana is not on strike and Nigeria is not on strike, exams will continue. It is your student that will suffer because you now have to do a makeup for them or set another exam, that kind of a thing. So we suffer, and it has implication because Nigeria will have to foot the bill of making some other arrangement. So it wasn't just like that. Remember also, the hatch was on. And some people have paid. People did not have money. And when they stop everything. So we are saying that there must be need for a discussion and advocacy. The leadership too should take the interests of Nigeria at heart. They should take the interest. They should consider Nigeria. Look at, we had a strike in France. That was a national strike. But light and everything was on. Private jets, private
electricity,
were on.
power, water, health sector,
you can make your
broadcasting,
point.
whatever. I mean, these are categorized as essential services.
Certainly, you can make your point very clearly, and any sensible government will listen to you, but you don't have to off light, you don't have to stop hospital services, etc. And I think it's just for us to sit and change our orientation. The issue of orientation, there's no value for life, and this is just the issue in Nigeria.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Do appreciate it. Professor John Gambola has joined us all the way from Kaduna. He's the chairman, Industry Relations, Kaduna State University, pioneer vice chancellor of Greenfield University, Kaduna, member of the Academic Advisory Committee of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Kuru, in Jos Plateau State, and a former dean of School of Postgraduate Studies at the Kaduna State University. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
And of course, Mr. Michael Mbanefo, a legal practitioner who is based here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Right, that's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.